Hey Rebels, welcome back to the channel. So the markets are showing us some very clear signs that we're entering an altcoin season, and I want to jump into that in this video. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and take off right here. So last week, we were right around here, and I was expecting higher prices. There were a lot of signals that I was watching to give me that indication, and you can watch last week's video if that interests you. But either way, that's exactly what has played out here. We had a nice strong week, and we are right now currently meeting resistance. This is the total three minus the stable coins. So this is basically representation of the broader altcoin market as a whole, excluding some of the top 10 effectively. And what I have here is a speed line. So all I've done is I've drawn a trend line from the low to the high, and I've projected it off of this move. And what this is going to do is it's going to tell us if this move is stronger or weaker. And right now we can see that very clearly that this move is much stronger. And if I go into the Bitcoin chart, if I do the same thing on the Bitcoin chart here, where I take a trend line from the low to the high and I project it from the low here, we can actually see that we're a little weaker on this move. So the altcoins are actually showing more strength than Bitcoin, which is the indicator for altcoin season. Another way to look at that very clearly is if I take the total 2 divided by Bitcoin, this shows me very clearly what the altcoins are doing versus Bitcoin. And we can see that last week we had an absolute banger, an absolute runner. But this is the very, very beginning. In the video that I showcased, we hadn't had this move. We were basically just breaking out of this consolidation down here. We had higher exchange volume coming in, and there were other signals, like I said in that video, that were suggesting higher prices. And what we've actually done is we've broken this multi-year trend line. And that is a huge, huge signal. And if we go back in previous cycles here, let me just put this on a weekly to kind of condense this. We go back in previous cycles, we can see that basically once we've broken this trend, probably more like so fashion, once we broke this trend, that's when the altcoin season really got started, and we started to see that major outperformance in Bitcoin, right? So the altcoin season is here, I believe. It's a very short window that you can see that the altcoins outpaced Bitcoin by a substantial margin, but it's a very short period of time. You know, it's about 10% of the cycle or so that this actually happens. So you're going to get about 80% of the gains in the last 10% of the cycle. So zooming way in, we had a descending wedge on, this is the others dominance versus Bitcoin dominance. And I've been talking about this for weeks on the channel. We had this descending wedge, which is a bullish pattern playing out. We were starting to get squeezed here, and the market was about to tell us which direction it was most likely to go. Typically, the way wherever these patterns break out, that's typically the direction that it's going to go. I had warned that there was a potential of coming down to this price point because that's where we've seen support and resistance before every single cycle. So we had to keep that in mind as well. You have to keep both sides of the market in your mind, right? Have basically a plan for both sides. But either way, we've had a nice strong weekly close above, and we're looking for another second weekly close above these tops. Things are just now really starting to heat up. We're seeing the market clearly telling us that the altcoins are starting to outperform Bitcoin. And the most simple way to really view this is the Bitcoin dominance. You know, all those other charts give us some indication and give us some price points to give us an idea of support and resistance when viewing the market in those terms. But the purest way to look at this basically is Bitcoin dominance, right? So we've really started to break down. We broke down this top. I have this overbalance in time and price here, which tells us that if Bitcoin dominance falls this low for this long, that will be the longest and farthest that it's been able to be pushed down in this entire run, giving us a clear indication that the macro trends are most likely starting to turn. And there's actually a nice confluence here between that and this trend line. So when Bitcoin dominance breaks this trend line, I think that's going to give us the most high probability confirmation that this is playing out the way that I'm describing. Until that happens, until that doesn't mean that there's no upside until that happens. Obviously, there's definitely upside. And if you wanted to front run this, which I see a lot of people doing right now, there's a lot of good entries to be had in anticipation for this. Now, if this doesn't play out, then that will be its own signal, and we'll have to reassess at that time. But right now, the market is telling us clearly that there is a clear breakdown in Bitcoin dominance, and the performance of the other altcoins is starting to outpace that of Bitcoin, which is very typical for the end of the cycle, as I showed in the other chart there. This is altcoin season really kicking off. So that being said, this is very exciting because you can have, like I said, about 80% of the gains happening in the last 10% of the cycle. But the problem with that is that it's going to be more volatile and it's going to be more emotional. So you have to understand that going into that. The easy times are over. The easiest time in this whole cycle was to buy Bitcoin at $20,000. Yes, it was at 15, but 20,000 was about where it was giving us confirmation that we were going to go higher, and that was a much lower volatility environment, much easier emotionally to get in at those price points, even though when you're down in those lows, it can be a little harder to buy, but the emotions are way less. It's a lot easier to buy when the emotions are, kind of suppressed in the market. When the emotions are high and there's greed involved, it's a much more powerful feeling than fear, actually. So you have to be more careful. So how can you give yourself, I guess, an edge over other participants in the market, at least the newcomers? Even if you are a newcomer, what can you learn to give yourself an advantage? And that I would say would be to learn where there are points of support and resistance so that you can expect that in the market. So if you're getting into the market right now, you might be really excited because we had that last week. It was a very strong week. We could have another strong week. I'm not saying we can absolutely break down further, but you have to keep a level head. And right now there's pretty major support for Bitcoin dominance right at this support level here on these bottoms. It also coincides with this 50% tool. All I've done is I've used the Fibonacci retracement tool right here, and I've gone into the settings and I've put in 0, 0.5, and 1. And that just gives me a little midpoint calculator here so that I can, just gives me a calculator so I can see if I drag this down to here from low to high, these 50% levels often coincide with support and resistance levels. It also gives us a sign of strength and weakness. So on this move from the low to the high, Bitcoin dominance is still technically in a strong position, right? When it breaks down from this 50% level and down from this trend line, it's in a much weaker position. So you couple that together with the overbalance in time and price, you have a really, really high probability shot that we're going lower from here in the Bitcoin dominance. That's high probability confirmation that the altcoin season is in fact going. But on the way there, it's not going to be in a straight line. So how can you keep your emotions in check? That's what I'm getting at. Well, we have some support right here at the Bitcoin dominance very shortly. And if you notice on the thumbnail, what we also have is we have some resistance on the total 3. And so, like I said, this is the altcoin market. We're having some resistance here. Now, we can break through that. Absolutely. We can absolutely break through that. But it's just you have to keep this in mind. So I'm going to dive into a couple of charts and show you, well, if you're new to the market and you're trying to find entries, how can you do that? Okay, so I'm going to dive into that after actually I go through some data that is continuing to look very bullish. Giving me more confirmation signs. So last week we had rising volume with rising prices. We just broke these tops, and that was a very good sign. And we also just broke this top over here, right? And so we're getting a really strong acceleration in the volume, exchange volume, similar to what we saw over here. Now we do have to constantly keep an eye on this because that can change and we can have things reverse on us. Again, we have to always keep a level head and just read the data as it comes in. Okay. So, we're seeing flat line right here. Not surprising because we just had a weekend. That's typically low volume. So that will take this 7-day average down. Okay. So, but that's nothing to worry about right now. We're seeing very, very strong volume, which is good. More volume than we've seen in months and months. The other thing I want to point out here is the funding rate. So when you're going to take a leverage position, you have to pay a funding rate. So if you're going long, typically, if you're going long, you have to pay the shorts or you have to pay a funding fee. Now, when the rates are relatively low, and we'll take BTC for example, anywhere from maybe 10 to 12%, things are kind of cool. But when things get really hot, that can go up to, see here, you had like 99%. So if you were to take a leverage long on around this time in December, you would be paying 100% a year for that position. If you borrowed $5,000 to take a position, you would owe $5,000 at the end of the year. And that's December 4th. So if we go back here and look at the charts at Bitcoin on December 4th, we can see where the price was over here in December was right around these highs. Right around these highs in December was when you would be paying the most. So funding rates can actually give us a really good idea of where the market stands as far as, is it overextended or not. The other one I wanted to show you here on the other side, if the prices have been going down for a very long time, funding rates will actually go negative. So right here on April 19th, you can see that hype was at negative 30%, meaning if you were trying to take a long position right there, you would actually get paid 30%. Or if you were trying to take a short position, you would be paying 30% a year on the money that you borrowed to do that. So let me find Hyperliquid here, and we'll just see what was going on during that time. And I've looked at this chart before, and it was right around here. Right around here is when you would have actually been getting paid to go long, and you can see that that would have been a very attractive thing to do, because we've basically been up only since then. So the main point I'm trying to drive home with this is when you see very high funding rates across the board, very, very hot, very high funding rates compared to previous funding rates, that can be a time where the market is overheated. Again, this was in December time, and this basically called the exact top of the market. So you can see right now, we're starting to get kind of things getting lit up across the board, kind of similar to this. Not everything was lit up over here very, very strongly. And if you look over here, we're just starting to get signs that the interest is coming back into the market, right? And then if I actually take this down into the 30-day, you can see that, yes, things are starting to heat up, but we're not lit up completely across the board. So I would say we're kind of in, mid territory as far as the funding rates go. Things aren't completely crazy across the board. Things that have been going crazy, like Hype has been going crazy, very crazy recently, and has very high funding rates. So I would not be taking a long on Hyperliquid necessarily, but you can see the Bitcoin is not nearly overheated. So that's one thing you can do if you're trying to decide what to get in. First of all, don't get into anything that has a very high funding rate and on the charts is at its highs and looking like it's been running hot, because that's not something that you want to get into. You want to look for something that has not been running hot, particularly, and look for a certain chart pattern that I'm about to show you. So yeah, we've covered the exchange volume and the funding rates. So let's just dive into a couple charts of some trades that I have eyed right now. One of them is Virtuals Protocol. Actually made a good trade on this one from the lows here to about the closing prices here. We had a good run, and then we finally formed this top here, which has been resistance so far. And if I just kind of get rid of this meth, I use 50% tools a lot to tell me if we're in strong or weak territory on any particular range. What we can see here, and I'll delete this for simplicity, is when you break this trend on a weekly time frame and you have a weekly close above that trend, that can be a high probability area to get in. And what I would do is I would set a stop loss essentially then below this swing low right here, right? So it's about 34%. So if you're using leverage, you could technically put a 3x long here, and that would allow you to risk or have a larger position size on the risk that you're willing to take. If you're willing to risk $500, you could buy $500 spot here. If you were willing to lose that whole 500, and if you went 3x long here, you could put that 500 into a 3x long. You'd have $1,500 to trade with, and then from there to all-time highs, that's 175%. That's nearly a 3x on your investment right there. You could also buy spot $500, and then you would lose 30% of that $500 and live to fight another day, right? But the basic premise that I'm trying to show here is that on a weekly time frame, and anybody can do this. This is just TradingView. It's a free website. Go create an account and just put yourself a trend line across these tops. I'll actually take my indicator off here. All you do is just and some people will use the closing prices and everything like that. And I guess on a closing price basis, we're even in stronger territory. I would advise just using the full price range. It's going to give you a higher probability. And if you just put them right on the wicks, we've closed above that. That's looking like it's showing some strength here. This is Sonic. I'm just going through a couple of these just to give you an idea of strength and weakness so that you can do this for yourself on a weekly time frame. So let's do the same thing. Put that there. Looks like we have starting to regain this support level. It's more obvious on the daily time frame. And we're closing above this trend line. The problem with trying to get into the very lows is that if you try to buy before this, we could just be retesting and we could go lower. It happens time and time again. So you don't really want to front run. You don't really want to front run this unless you are an active day trader and you are really looking at the markets, every single day. And, it's possible, right? But if you're just new to this and you're looking to make some gains, I would stick to the top 100 tokens and go through the charts like this. And if it's broken its weekly time frame here, then you're probably in good territory. But then again, if you look at things like SUI, for example, actually SUI is actually in a pretty decent spot right here as well. But there are things, actually a better example of things to avoid would be things like Hyperliquid, because, and not to say that we can't go higher, we can absolutely, and I expect higher prices. I have a very large position in Hype, but it's not something that I would be getting into right now because we're at the very top of the range. If I go over here and get rid of some of my drawings here, you can just see that we're here at all-time highs. I mean, perhaps you can wait for a pullback. The problem with bull markets is that these pullbacks typically get shorter. They're more volatile, but they're shorter lived. You know, I think gone are the days where we're going to have several months of downside that you could really time your entries and be patient. It's going to be a lot harder in that sense. So I would avoid things like Hype, but I would look into the stronger coins like the Virtuals, the Suis. One here, a good example is SEI, is a layer one protocol that I've seen a lot of increasing. I've seen a ton of increasing TVL on that one. And this is another tool I'm just going to show you quick. No, I don't want to do that. I want to do this. Go to analysis. I'm going to go to DeFi Llama is a really good tool to use to get an idea of how much money is actually on these protocols. And if there's money on the protocols, that means people are putting their actual money on chain because they believe in the project. So you can see that TVL for Sei, which is just a layer one protocol, don't need to know much more than this, has had increasing TVL. I mean, people are putting more and more of their hard-earned money into this protocol in the various tokens, basically the various economies of this blockchain. More and more money is coming in. So that's a good, strong sign. That's definitely something you want to look at as well. Hopefully throughout this video, I've showing you some tools to go in and take a look at for yourself, just to give you an idea. I mean, there's a lot packed into this little video, but like I said, this is kind of urgent. And if you want to give yourself an edge and understand how to give yourself higher probability plays, these are the things you're going to want to look for. Really, you don't want to be getting into anything below the top 100 or top 200, and you want to see there being actual activity on chain, right? So you can see more and more money has actually been going into this protocol. And if you wanted to go in, you can see the various fees that have been generated. That's real money, real actual value being accrued in the space. So, okay, we've done our homework a little bit, just dived very briefly into the protocol. You can see that their TVL is increasing over time pretty aggressively at this point. And if we go back to the charts, one thing that I'm seeing is that we have not quite, oh, there it is. We have not quite broken this downtrend. So if you are early to this, this might be something that you're waiting for. We could wait for a confirmation of a breakout of this significant support and resistance level. You can see that's very significant right here. I do have this other pattern here. It's just a symmetrical triangle that we have broken out of. We have this downtrend, a shorter term downtrend that we've broken out of, right? But until we break through this, you know, this just has a much higher probability of going higher. This has a higher probability of rejection. So in trading, you want to give yourself, you want to stay on the side of probabilities. And if just as a look here, you know, from a macro perspective, it's always good to zoom out. You know, there's nothing saying that we don't come down lower to double bottom here before we carry on, right? So this is a lower probability. If you bought in right today, yes, you'd be getting a slightly better price. I mean, yeah, 20%, 18% or so, as opposed to something like Sonic that has already broken out of that, weekly downtrend. So this is just a very, very simple way to go through and check out the top 100 maybe tops and go through the charts and see what's breaking out and if it's overextended, like something like XRP, for example. I haven't even looked at XRP, but XRP has been running very, very hot lately. So that is something that I would absolutely avoid. I would avoid this like the plague. If you missed XRP, I'm sorry. You missed the boat from the lows to the high there. Yeah, 500. That's a 6x on your money. Congratulations to those who got into XRP. A lot of the XRP people are very zealot-like, and it is a very cult-like community. And congratulations to those people. They've been able to make some money. And I'm not saying that XRP doesn't go higher from here, but if I were to draw that same line on the weekly downtrend, this is what you're waiting for. And you want to be in strong tokens, absolutely, but you want to see what phase of the market are you in, and every chart is going to have to be evaluated on its own merits, right? So XRP, I would avoid that because we're already breaking out into all-time highs. It can absolutely go further, and we have ways to, project potential areas that could go. But we're going to see we're closer to meeting resistance than we are, from these lows. So hopefully that was helpful. Things are looking very, very exciting. Things are heating up. We have a number of indicators telling us that altcoin season has started, and we're late in the cycle, but we're early to altcoin season. So if you missed the entire cycle, you weren't able to get Bitcoin down at $20,000 and we're up at $120,000. If you weren't able to get Ethereum down at 1,500 and we've doubled since then, that's okay. There's still a lot more room of upside in this market. You just have to be very selective of what you're going to go into, because effectively what we can do is we can make our money in the virtuals, in the SUIs, in the Aptoses, in these larger caps, and then liquidity is going to trickle down the risk curve into the smaller ones. So we'll be able to rotate our capital along with the rest of the market, because as people make their gains from XRP, when they start selling out of here, they're going to be looking for other opportunities. So they're going to be looking for the Says of the world where they're in this part of the cycle, right? And so we're going to be able to go farther and farther down the risk curve, not risking all of our capital, but we will be able to follow down the risk curve and into the certain narratives that are popping off. And we'll be able to actually still have a hell of a run. I mean, typically that altcoin season lasts 6 to 8 months. So, but we're at the very, very beginning stages of that. Very exciting. Don't get into anything that's overheated. You want to wait for a pullback for entry. Just be aware that your orders may not get hit and you may not be able to hit that opportunity, and that's okay. There are hundreds and hundreds of charts and you don't really have to worry about it. So anyway, hopefully that was helpful. Please leave a comment, like, and subscribe for more. And we're just going to keep continuing follow these markets. So far, the analysis has helped us stay on the right side. We've been able to basically call the highs and the lows of Bitcoin anyway, which is the big daddy. We've been able to do that with a very high success rate in the last year or so. Been able to follow the markets and read what the markets are telling us in real time. So if you want to learn how to read the markets in real time and do this for yourself, continue following the channel, and we'll keep doing this together. Thanks, guys.